Hello and welcome back to ABA Generalized. Today we're going to talk about ABA in different settings. So we're going to talk about it in the home setting, in the school setting, and in a clinic setting. We will do community setting at a later date. We thought that deserves its own episode. So we are going to just focus on those three settings for today. So Anne, if you could talk a little bit about the school setting.
Yeah. So so the school setting, I think it really depends on if you are a contractor or an employee. If you're a contractor, you're going to have a bunch of goals that you're going to be tracking. If it also depends, like you can be providing services in a special ed class, you can be providing services in a gen ed class. You may or may not have an RBT. You may be, if you do have an RBT or even just like a one-on-one, if you have an RBT, you have to provide that supervision. If you have just like a one-on-one aid, you could do check-ins. It doesn't have to be as often as if you had an RBT.
Would that be more like
but
your
you might
professional though? Like if you don't have like a one-on-one RBT, like you just have a regular one-on-one, that would be your paraprofessional, right?
Yeah, and then you could be providing more like consult to the teacher or even to the paraprofessional. But it might not be as you might not be overlapping as much as you would typically with an RBT because you have to meet that 5%, right?
Oh, that's what I was just gonna say. It's a
And 2 face-to-face per month.
Yeah, so it is a little bit harder to, I'm sure it's easier to observe like a paraprofessional or like a teacher because you're just, checking in. You don't have that requirement but as you just said, in RBT, you have to do the 5% two facing, all of those requirements. So can you just like give us a generalized example of like what a day-to-day could look like in a school setting? Not necessarily your school or, just like what, again, in general, like what it could
Yeah.
look like.
Yeah, so it could look like you're going in and you're observing, maybe you were asked to observe like a specific time of the day. So you go in and you observe that time, or you just, if you have an upcoming IEP meeting or if you're doing an FBA, you want to make sure that you're seeing that student across several classes, different teachers, even, if they're older and, maybe middle school, high school. You could even meet after school. Some teachers usually stay after school, based on, whatever they're contracted for, and you can do like your consult at that time too. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
It did. Yeah, it's just
like with every student, it just looks different.
That is a lot different than even, I feel like, contracted, like, or when you're like part of the school district, like obviously you just said it looks different than being like an outsider coming in to observe your client. And I think, Erica, you have a little bit more experience with like that side of it, like not being contracted with a school district, just popping into schools to assist an RBT or assist a child or whatever. Can you kind of elaborate on that side of school?
Yeah. So, Anne and I both were contracted when we were working at the last company. So that also we can talk a little bit more about the contracted part if we want to dive into that a little bit more. But the non-contracted part is a whole other ballgame because you're using insurance. And so the contracted part, usually you'll see the company has a contract literally with the school that says, hey, we're going to be providing X amount of services, right? Whereas on my end right now, you have insurance paying for it. So you have to justify the reasons why they need support in school. You have to justify, the specific goals that you're going to be working on and how many hours they need per week and providing that one-on-one service if that's something that they need. So I have a couple kiddos right now in schools, in private schools specifically, because just the way that our county is, we're unable to go into the schools right now. It's just a whole I don't know. I
I
won't
feel
get
like
into
you
it.
find that in a lot of states right now, though. Like a lot of
Yeah.
outside companies without that contract are not allowing BCBAs and
Did
RBAs.
that get harder because of COVID? Like, I feel like that's when I saw a change, but I don't know if that's like.
The conversations I've had, at least around here, it doesn't seem like it was because of COVID. It seemed like it was a little bit before that. But I will say, like, I go into one specific school district, but that is not where I am currently. Like, it's kind of further out. And so like what I was told in actually a more recent meeting, they said if that principal will let you in. So I think it sometimes is like the district itself, but other times it's the principal that like, do we want to have that outside provider providing services if we cannot provide that service? So I think it's all about fine lines and trying to like at least develop trusting relationships, right? Because at the end of the day, like it is all about like who you, I don't want to say
Who
like,
you know? Who you
yes
know?
and like, yes and no, but like, I feel like around where I've been at least, like, if I can cultivate a good relationship, I'm more often being able to be seen in that setting again. So I try to, I mean, that's just how I am as a professional anyways. Like I'm always trying to cultivate good relationships. So this way, like in the future, if someone does need our services or does need our help, we're able to at least come back and provide that, you know? Or maybe we will get that referral if they have a kiddo that needs our services. So yeah, so it looks a little differently when we have insurance versus a contract. But I will say you have a little more wiggle room when you are insurance. I feel like with school like contracts, like you have to be very specific in terms of the way that their IEP goals are written, because at least the contracted one, I don't know, Anne, if you recall when we were contracted, like I feel like a lot of our goals had to be aligned with the IEP goals, like specifically. Now I kind of just use the IEP goals if like I'm in a specific school that like does have the IEP active. I'll like sometimes pull some of that too, so we kind of keep it aligned because the school is asking me for goals too that we're working on. So like a lot of that collaboration.
Yeah, I think when in one of the districts I was in, um, it was funded by the school and insurance. One of the cases, and so I could do whatever I wanted pretty much, and they were really flexible. Like whatever goals I wrote, like when they would do the progress reports, I would update the progress and then send it to the case manager. I didn't have access to like their database to put it in myself, whereas the school that we were in, I had access, but those were only like we tracked just behavior and maybe one or two goals that were tied with that, and then the teacher goals, and that I would say is like kind of different, is that like the teacher goals would be tied to like academic goals like tacting and matching and um stuff like that,
And for the
which is similar to
people,
here.
tacting is labeling.
Oh my god, should we do a whole VV map? Whole VV map
That episode would be
episode?
4 hours long.
But
So overall, do we think that school goal, like there's less goals in a program in a school setting? I
yeah,
guess could be.
Yes,
Okay, so I think it all varies.
I say yes.
If you guys pulled up one of my behavior plans right now for a kiddo that receives okay, so if I think it's like 35 hours a week of school one-on-one services, I need to make sure that I have at least
I
like
guess
20
because that's,
school goals.
I feel like well, that makes sense because I feel like you don't normally see that many hours given to a school case.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, okay, so actually they are 20-ish hours a week, I want to say, because if it's 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, yeah, that's about 20 hours that I'm thinking of just this one kiddo, right? And the insurance company made us split the goals, so it has to say like where we're tracking it. So like if it's home, it has to say home. If it's school, it has to be school, and they're specific.
I've had
But like if you look at it, like you see like copious amounts of school goals, and then like maybe like a good handful
but I feel like
of your
so
home goals.
that's like, I feel like that's rare to have that many in school though.
Yeah, it all varies on what the
Yeah.
kiddo really needs to work on, but also if you're trying to provide like a one-on-one service, especially like if you're trying to justify the needs for it, like you have to write a lot of those goals that are going to help with developing those social skills, or even just like following directions in a classroom from a different person, or I'm just trying to think of things that are not too specific to this kiddo. Just like playing games with kids in general, like, and going up to them. Like I said, social goals, like it all varies.
Yeah, like gaining attention, asking for breaks, asking to take a walk, like
Like staying on
doing
task, yeah, like
coping
using appropriate,
strategies.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. All that stuff.
But
So,
yeah, so I mean, like I said, it all varies based upon all that stuff, but goals for, I think, the contract stuff is definitely less. And I'm sure, Anne, you don't have as many goals either. In school, you have at least probably like 4 or 5 you work on.
I mean, maybe even less than that. And like, it's not usually me who writes them, it's usually the teacher. And then it's
I
just
kind
like,
of like
I'm
that
like,
though, because
I can, yeah.
well, I just feel like because the teachers, like, especially if they don't have a one-on-one or the RBT, like the teacher is the one having to like assess that. So like it'd rather be something that they find appropriate to work on.
Yeah, and then I'll make the data sheet. I'm like, I'll make the data sheets all day long if you want me to.
But if you also
Because I'm the one who collects it at the end of the day and then has to look at it and see like if we're collecting it, if it makes sense how we're collecting it and if the goal makes sense.
But like, I was also like piggybacking off of that, like my parent goals specifically, like I'll ask parents what they want to work on so that they feel like if they're writing the goal, then they're more likely to implement the goal. So same thing for like teachers. If the teacher's writing the goal, they're more likely to implement it. If we're writing the goals, like, I feel like if it's like
Yeah.
that specific person, they're
That
more
makes a lot of
likely to
sense.
find
Yeah.
as they
Also, like to kind of go off that, forgot about parent training and caregiver, that's not a thing.
Because you're not seeing the parents. You're doing
Well, no, like even teacher goals, like there's not, which actually gives me a really good idea to pitch for the future. I don't know if teachers would be on board with that.
I mean, people need to learn skills in general of how to work with our kiddos, and if they want to learn something, maybe if they come up with that goal that they want to improve on,
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll even ask my
Proof.
RBTs that, like, I think, gee, when I was working with you, maybe I even asked you, like, is there anything you want to work on, improve?
I've always had really good relationships with my BCBAs, and I feel like it works better when I can collaborate with like the BCBA of like, hey, this is what I'm seeing that they're struggling with. Like, can we make a goal in it? And most of the time they're like, yeah, let's figure it out. Let's take some baseline data. Let's, see what we can do. I mean, there has been a few times also that they'll be like, no, I don't think that's appropriate to work on. And like, that's fine. That's why I'm an RBT and not a BCBA. There are some things that like I think we should be working on, but it really just might not be appropriate, or we have to work on prerequisite skills before we get to that goal. I do think that it works. Again, programs work a lot better when there's that collaboration between an RBT and a BCBA across all settings. Because I think that's how, like, me as an RBT, I'm the one working with a child every single day. And sometimes I'm not seeing some things that you're seeing as a BCBA. And like, I don't know, there's even some behaviors that like I'll bring up to a BCBA and they're like, well, I've never seen that. And I'm like, well, I can record because guess what? It's happening when you're not here, promise. Every single day. It's because they're they're really comfortable with me because I'm seeing them so often and we're very well paired, and seeing them throw a whole tantrum over something stupid. And the BCBA is like, I've never seen that. Stick around. a
I
little
know,
bit
like,
longer.
I know that we've kind of like dived off of, ABA in different places, but I do really want to pull this up because you did bring that up, about the collaboration stuff. So I think I had sent this to you guys a couple weeks ago that I saw on LinkedIn this amazing post about RBTs and BCBAs collaborating. And I kind of just want to like paraphrase this a little bit, but like, this woman had made this post and it was like the RBT has an idea and the BCBA won't listen. That's a problem. And then it goes into like, of course the RBT can be wrong. The BCBA doesn't need to agree, but like listening to the RBTs because of that is super important, right? The success of the case depends on the RBT receiving direction from the BCBA. And so when we are providing, any sort of direction based upon the RBT, like the client benefits from that. So, anyone that's listening, just know that like if you have a good relationship with your RBT or your BCBA and your RBT or your families or just cultivating those relationships, you're gonna have better client success. And that is my soapbox.
I agree.
You gonna die on it?
Let's dive into a new setting. I think that covers school pretty well. And then if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. I don't have much experience at school, but Anne and Erica do, so they can help you out. My last 2 years has been in a clinic setting, which I feel like is very different from home or school. It's honestly been my favorite environment to work in, as long as you have, I would say, good support from a clinical director and the BCBAs. I think when you don't have that support is when it starts to fall apart. However, the general idea of it does work really well. I like that I'm not by myself all the time. I have other RBTs to bounce ideas off of. I have other BCBAs to bounce ideas off of. There is so much just talking on a day-to-day of like, hey, did you see this? How do we think? There's just, hey, I saw that in my client, that worked with us. Like, why don't you try that? Just like the different things of going back and forth works wonders. It also is great to establish a foundation for kiddos that are just getting into ABA. A lot of the times it takes a really long time to establish control in like a home setting, because that's their home turf. That is, where they've had control for however many years. So like bringing them out of that environment, bringing them kind of away from mom and dad too. But yes, so it allows that, like kind of clean slate, building that foundation from nothing. And I would say like the final like positive of that is high intensity behaviors. So like if you have aggression, if you have elopement, if you have like tantrums that are not like tantrums that are with like aggression, or any of those behaviors that are like, again, very high intensity, you can have other hands to help step in. Just for example, like at the clinic, I recall a kiddo that used to have like really high intensity tantrums that could escalate to aggression, or like he would just lay on the ground and like flail his whole body. And like obviously there's other kids around, so it's, we have to somehow keep him contained of, not restricting in any way, but like not have other kids going running over to him so that they don't get hurt. And it was nice to be able to have like, hey, I got your kid, we're safe over here, go help. Be an extra set of hands to be like, let's figure this out. Or even a BCBA that might not be on that case is able to go and step in and be like, what can I do? What's his behavior plan? What are the strategies of how we go forward? I would say the only con in that setting is supervision. There's usually a lot of technicians on, or at least my previous, employment, that's how it was. There's a lot of RBTs on each case. So the BCBA has to spread out their supervision. And I mean, the company that we all came from, I was so used to getting that supervision at least once a week. And I wasn't getting that. I still was getting my 5%. Don't worry. That was still happening, but like overall, but I was a person that I liked having constant supervision. And again, because there were so many technicians on each case, I wasn't always getting that. So that's, I mean, I feel like that's clinic in a nutshell.
I do agree heavily with like the fact of like that's a more of like a common ground turf, right? So like if you have kiddos that really struggle with even control,
Yes.
bringing them into a clinic or a common ground setting in general usually helps
And it's
to be able to build
also
those skills.
right. And it's also different than school of like, I feel like a lot of it's an attention seeking behavior. Like a lot of teachers or whatever will give in. And it was so much easier to just like give another RBT or PCBA look of like, don't even come over here. We're just going to go through it. And they were like, got it. Moving on. I'm going to go over there. Like, seems like you have that under control. They could be having a full on tantrum, but again, if the function was attention, no, we're going to sit here. Nobody's giving you attention. And I do feel like, again, compared to like home or school, it was so much easier to like be like, no, don't even, just walk away. And everyone got it. Like nobody came over and interjected when I have been in home settings that the parent, like, even though I said that, the parent still like is like, come on, little boy, like, let's go, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, that's what I said just not to do, but great. He just got reinforced. But I think the most common setting that we've all definitely dealt with is the home setting. And I feel like that is across any agency in ABA, like that's mostly where we're all going. So if we could all kind of touch on home a little bit before we wrap this up for the day. And do you want to start kind of talking about home?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, I would agree that it's the most common setting that you're going to be providing services. You have to get real comfy with the parents, and it can be a little awkward, I think, at first, like even especially if you're just starting out in ABA, like you're given an address, you show up and you're like, now I'm going to be a part of your family. Because you do, like especially if you're there every day for a few hours a day, like you're gonna become you're gonna be really close, so you're gonna have a really good rapport, hopefully. And you're gonna learn the home routine and how they function in that house, and that looks different from client to client. And I think there can be positives and negatives to that as well. If you're working with a client with like who's really rigid, and you're trying to switch up the schedule, and maybe parents don't want to switch up the schedule, or like, no, like we have to do this now, and that could be hard. You really have to have a good rapport with parents to be like, hey, can we, like, in 5 minutes, I want to work on this, can you help me with it? That can go both ways. You can also have parents who are really, really involved in sessions, and parents who kind of ghost you during sessions, and like go like, and not to say that they're doing it on purpose, maybe they are, or maybe they are also working, and we talked about that before, where like a lot of parents work from home, and so like they really try to use that time of like, all right, I gotta work, but like let me know if you need me, like send me a text. And like I know we also talked about this, where like some companies don't let the RBTs and the parents have each other's phone numbers, which to me that can create a barrier, because if parents upstairs and you're downstairs working with the client, and you're like, hey, we have to go to the bathroom, like can you, like we need extra undies or something, like throw them down, like you can't, like
or especially if you have a parent like who doesn't like want you to go. I know I had a parent that like we only stayed on one level of the house, and like if they went upstairs, like I couldn't just go upstairs to like knock on the door and be like, hey, like I need your help, and I'm not screaming in their house. So it's like, what do you do?
Well, and in that instances, I can think of someone specific where like I have been upstairs, but it was kind of just like an unwritten rule that like we stay like on the first floor or we go in the basement.
Yeah.
But just letting the parents know. And but that was a good opportunity. Like if the client was looking for mom and they were upstairs, I'd be like, hey, you have to call their name. And then they would go, mom. And I'm like, no, you have to do it louder. So like that, I'm like, how can we get mom's attention without us going upstairs? I know, use the client, like have them man for attention. But yeah, I mean, if they can't do that, if they have text or if they have a device, like there's only so much you can do with that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and even like going outside. Um,
I don't know how you all didn't have phone numbers and would go outside. I would not. Nope.
well, I
Mm-mm.
did. Like we didn't
It was
really.
Yeah, it was just my last company that wouldn't allow us to have the parents'
But like
number.
still, like I
Yeah.
don't know how you can go outside of the house, even if it's in their backyard, because like anything can
Mhm.
happen, right? A case of emergency. I personally would not feel comfortable unless like the parent came with me, even to go for like a short
Mhm.
stroll or like play
Oh
on the
yeah, I
playground.
would have the parents
I
come
need
with me. Like
visuals.
yeah, if they were if I knew they were an eloper and we were working on like safety in the neighborhood, parent would have to come with me,
Mhm.
and I would text them like, hey, we're going in the backyard, and then when we would come back in, we're back in.
I
Like just
didn't
like
even
so they knew where we were.
I never even thought of that because I had an older kiddo at my last company. Like I didn't have mom or dad's number, but I had an older kiddo that would elope out the front door and like run down the road. It was, and he lived on a busier road. Like it was not like you know what I mean, like a cul-de-sac. Like it was like off of a
Mhm.
main highway.
Mhm.
Um, and like it was, and I would just take off because I was like, I'm this kid, I need to get this kid safe. So I would just go like reaction, go get him. And I know like I would just like kind of scream for mom and dad, be like, he's gone, like we're going. And I know they would like get in the car and come with, but now just thinking like if I had just could call them, be like, we're running down the road, help. That would have probably
Yeah.
been better.
Mhm.
Anyway, I digress. Go on.
Well, I don't know. Erica, what do you have to add about homes?
I can add a lot of stuff about homes. I feel like home settings are great for our natural environment teaching, right? That's what we want. We want least
Yeah,
restrictive environment.
Mhm.
And so that's when, when we do go into the clinic, that is a more restrictive environment because obviously, like, we're bringing a kiddo into something that's not their natural place. Um, I feel like you're able to work on more of those daily living skills in a more naturalistic way,
Mhm.
especially because then if you do have a very involved parent, um you're able to show them exactly what you're doing. I really also enjoy home because I can talk to a parent at the very end of a session and be like, hey, you see how we did this today? Let's try that again more in the future. Let me know how it goes over the weekend or when we're not here, and kind of work on it that way. Because if you're in a clinic, like, you can't necessarily show them. If you're in a school, you can't necessarily show them either. um
absolutely.
I do enjoy the
Mhm.
parent involvement as much as possible, so I'm constantly like, please, like, that's probably one of the number one questions I get during an assessment or like the initial conversation with parents. Should we be in the area when you're having sessions? Yes, if you can. That would be amazing. Like, I would love
Hmm.
that. I think that was like literally one of the first things I was asked from one of the parents that's like literally sits in on sessions whenever she can. She's like, do you want me here? Do you not want
Aw.
me here? I was like, you can sit here all you want. Like, I will talk to you throughout while we're doing all these things, while I'm training the RBT. Like, so this way I mean, I can explain what we're doing and why we're doing it, because a lot of
Mhm.
times, going back to like the goals situations, like, we have these goals. I do review them with parents, but when we're running them, it looks different than what we're explaining and how the goal is written, right? Like, I can say like, we'll request for 5 different items and activities throughout a 2-hour session using a carrier phrase, right? That can mean anything. Like, a carrier phrase
Yeah.
is, what's a carrier phrase, right? Like, I can explain it to parents, but until they see it, it's different. So I really do enjoy when parents can at least observe or at least be in the area, or I can talk to them afterwards. And like maybe they're like an earshot away. So like I have one family that like is an earshot away at all times. Um, I feel like the home also helps with like social skills between siblings. Because that's something else you don't get at the clinic, you don't get it at the school.
Yeah.
Yes, you do get that social interaction in both of those settings, but at
I
home,
feel like social interactions with siblings is a lot different though than social interactions with peers or
Oh,
adults.
yeah.
1000%, because
Mhm.
I mean, from my own personal life, I have different interactions with my friends than I do with my siblings. So like, I think that also, anyways, I think that helps a lot because that's something else that I've been trying to work on and like parents have brought to my attention. I'm trying to think if there's anything else like social interactions, natural environment teaching, if there's any like dressing or undressing, like
That was what
ADLs.
That's exactly what
Um,
I was just gonna say, like brushing hair, brushing teeth, like getting dressed,
Mhm.
like all of those things you can't really work on it at school or at a clinic. You
Yeah,
kind of
like
can at a
food
clinic,
prep.
but yeah, like the like daily living skills is definitely
Mhm.
something that like you can definitely work on at home.
well, and I think directly back to our friends, G, that we're gonna actually have mom on in the near future, actually in a couple weeks. They hated getting dressed. Like we would try and dress them in the morning, and they just didn't
I
want.
made 15,000 visuals for these children.
And then I made G make one visual, and then it worked.
So there were so many things we tried.
Wow. Wow. Just
We
have to find the
no,
right
okay, that
visual.
worked. It did work, but it worked for like a week, and then we tried to do something else.
Well, they raced. It was the racing plus the
Well, it's a
visual.
bunch of stuff.
And then, yeah, then it fell off for a minute, but then I think they were fine.
They were siblings, but with I was that was the other thing is I was RBT for both children. And so I had to like pick and choose who I was going to be with at what time. That's a whole other story. Anyway, yes, but daily living skills is obviously a big pro of working in the home environment. I do want to mention that I think we've mentioned it already on this episode. The big con is having the parents there and jumping in when you need them to ignore, or the child having control over their home turf of like, this is my house, I get to do what I want. I had a little buddy that it was rough. If we could have had him in a clinic setting or in a school setting, I think we would have had so much more success with him. But he just knew, this is how I get my way at home. And the screaming, the headbutting, all of the behaviors that we had to deal with because I was in his home field was extreme. And it was also extremely hard to break any of it because like parents were reacting, or he's like, no, this is how this is gonna go. And he was stubborn. But yeah, I think like kind of just to pull this all together, like these three environments obviously can look very different from client to client. I think that obviously in anything in ABA is completely individualized, but this is kind of what we've seen and kind of our experience in these settings. They all look similar, but they all look very different. They all have lots of pros and lots of cons. And I think that you need to assess that child of what needs to be worked on, what is like the main priority, and that's how we can kind of gauge where we're putting them. Are we working on them at school? Are we working with them at home? Are we working them in a clinic? What's going on? I will say that was like a major pro to my last company is like we offered all three settings. So it was during the initial assessment, it was, what do we need to work on? That's where we're starting. And we can move throughout the different environments once we got to that point. So I think, yeah, and obviously community is still another setting that you can have ABA in, but we're gonna do that in a couple weeks. And definitely, I know myself personally, like I have plenty of community stories of
So do I.
all the fun things that get to happen in the community, and again, the pros and cons of of community setting. But again, I think a good thing about ABA is we can service in a bunch of different environments, and it's all about helping the kiddo and how can we get them to succeed and be the best that they can be.
And I just want to piggyback off that real fast and just say, we look at the social significance and, the safety and the, like you said, the individualized or independence. That's what I'm looking for, to make sure that they can be the most independent as possible. But I just wanted to make sure that was also added too, because we look at social significance.
And take it.
All right, well, let's wrap this up. Yeah, if you have any questions about the different settings or anything in general, or if you want to be on our podcast, you can email us at aba.generalized.podcast@gmail.com. We're on Instagram at aba_generalized_the_pod. And YouTube, you can watch us at ABA Generalized. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe.
ABA Generalized, the podcast, is not providing professional advice. Please seek a professional in your area for specific advice and support.